Welcome to the K in Clarity podcast. I'm the host, Mezue. During this episode, we're joined by Tom Ellingson, founder of Ellingson Consulting and a previous business leader at PWC and IBM. Tom has been instrumental in driving strategic partnerships and digital innovation within the technology and business development space. Through Ellingson Consulting, he has advised over 20 startups on digital health strategies, IoT implementations, and cybersecurity solutions while earning certificates in digital health management for Columbia Business School. During this conversation, Tom discusses the unique healthcare landscape, especially in Minnesota, the challenges and opportunities of innovation in healthcare, and the critical role of data analytics and AI. He emphasizes the importance of collaborative innovation, the need to simplify healthcare processes, and the cultural barriers that often hinder progress. Tom shares his insights on how to navigate resistance to change and the future of healthcare innovation, advocating for a culture that embraces change while ensuring patient safety. He emphasizes the need for an open-minded approach to problem solving, the role of technology in reducing administrative burdens, and the necessity of fostering a culture that encourages boldness and innovation. Tom also highlights the significance of understanding risks and leveraging AI to stay informed about emerging trends, ultimately aiming to enhance patient care and operational efficiency. If this is your first time tuning in, here's the gist. The healthcare industry is buzzing with innovations, but there's a lot of noise and misconceptions out there. That's where we come in. Because of my experience in the healthcare ecosystem, I've gained a unique vantage point into the industry's inner workings. We're bringing you the conversations that typically happen behind boardrooms and strategy sessions, the real challenges, innovative solutions, and game-changing insights that are reshaping healthcare as we know it. On this podcast, we're bringing you face-to-face with the industry-leading healthcare founders, executives, and innovators. We're talking about the nitty-gritty of building and scaling healthcare companies, the hurdles they've overcome, and the strategies that have led to their success. More importantly, we dive into the personal challenges that come with trying to change a system as complex as U.S. healthcare. So whether you're a healthcare entrepreneur, a medical professional, or just someone passionate about the future of healthcare, this podcast is your backstage pass to the minds shaping the industry. Now let's have Tom tell us a little bit about themselves. Welcome, Tom, to the K in Clarity podcast. For the people listening, can you give a brief overview of who you are and what it is you do?
I would love to, and thanks a lot for letting me participate here. My name is Tom Ellingson, and I am a IT industry consultant that focuses on innovation and providing technology to help solve problems and do good. In some ways, that also means making things simpler, taking things out of the equation, and not just applying technology for technology's sake. I have over 35 years experience working across multiple industries, including manufacturing, agriculture, distribution, healthcare, and technical industries, and helping evolve certain technologies as well. My background is as a salesperson at IBM and then PricewaterhouseCoopers, handling Central United States for the risk management services. And then over 25 years working with startups, tech turnarounds, division turnarounds, internal collaboration and innovation in larger companies, as well as at the most basic level, seed level. How do you take an idea, bring it to market after development?
Perfect. We love that cost collaboration and the years of experience from there. So glad to hear that. Before we dive into the main questions, we always like to do an icebreaker. And so as a fellow Minnesotan, one thing I want to ask is, why do you think Minnesota has such a unique and deep roots of experience, especially with healthcare? And then has there been anything from your time, in Minnesota that has really impacted your career as you've gone along?
Yeah, as I've grown up in Minnesota. This is where I've been. This is where I've lived the whole time. I've reported into other large cities, Chicago, things like that, as far as my direct reports. But Minnesota is, I think, extremely unique with the Mayo Clinic being formed in Rochester, Minnesota, and its excellence in healthcare, again, being the number one hospital system in the world, as well as companies like Medtronic having their operational headquarters here and other large med tech type companies. It creates an opportunity for a lot of individuals professionally to grow through that experience and then be able to move from one company to another or have their whole career in one company, but be working on med tech and medical healthcare technologies. Literally where I'm at right now in my home office, I've got my neighbor across the street who's a VP of strategy for Medtronic for a couple of their major sectors. To my left is an individual, my next door neighbor, who's the chief medical officer for a med tech company that works with respirators, very, very big, obviously during COVID. And a couple doors to my right is an executive from Google as well. So there's an awful lot of technology here in the Twin Cities, both chip technology and med tech technology, as well as obviously a strong foundation in agriculture. And I think it really helps to kind of bring things together and have a collaborative working space for us. We also have an extremely high degree of work ethic that the Midwest is known for in Minnesota, which I think also helps. We have very long winters. It was back in the day, it was a joke when I used to intern at 3M that of course we do a lot of innovation. We don't have anything else to do in the wintertime. Well, you do other things in the wintertime, but it is dark a lot in part of the day and can be quite cold. I think we're also tend to be fairly collaborative as well, depending upon the industry that you're in, and really wanting to do good with what we do and bring that forward. We obviously want to make money and have strong returns for investors, but we also want to make sure that we're very well purposed in our lives and doing good with the resources that we have.
Yeah, I love that. I wish I was in Minnesota now, just from the way you explained everything there.
Yeah.
Going into there. Yeah. Going into there, I think one thing that you mentioned is your experience, in innovation as well. How do you kind of, with your 30 years plus of experience, think about innovation, particularly as well in applying that to healthcare and what you've done previously in your work?
Yeah, so I've obviously participated in a number of industries, and some of those are healthcare related. Way back in 98, 99, I was on a task force for healthcare data security as HIPAA was coming around. So I had some very early experience in applying IT technology to address certain requirements that the healthcare industry now had. And I would say that the cost of healthcare is extreme in our economy, right? Depending upon the numbers you look at, maybe 18.6% of our GDP, it bounces up to almost as high as 20%, depending upon the year, down to maybe 16%. And approximately half of that is covered by the United States government or the taxpayers. So in addition to helping people with their ailments and live longer, more comfortably, and enjoy life more, have more qualities of years, the quality of their life, and more years of that, we can also have an impact on the U.S. economy by helping decrease the cost of healthcare and obviously controlling the risks to the patients in the process.
With something that you had mentioned previously is, your years of experience in IT. How do you think data analytics as well plays a part in everything that we do and how you see it evolving?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting because big data was before AI became the kind of the talk of the town, so to speak, or the talk of the industry. Data analytics was the big words, right? Large data lakes and how we're leveraging that. And I see data analytics partnering extremely well with AI. Again, we need to make sure in all cases that we train the models very, very well so they don't repeat mistakes or they give us better information than we could do without their help, as well as gate them well to make sure that they're not making errors or building on top of errors that could cause harm, whether it be decision making from a business profitability standpoint or worse yet, healthcare for individuals and that personalized healthcare that's evolving. So I see data analytics being very, very solid still and actually being able to increase its strength when we pair it or partner it with AI and have things obviously well trained and well managed. In some circumstances, I don't think everybody fully understands how much you need to go into cleaning data and training the systems well. And it can be a little bit complex, but it's very, very important to do. Certain industries, we're seeing if that data isn't clean enough and the systems aren't well trained, especially when we're using AI and applying it with AI, we can see errors that take place, and those errors sometimes aren't caught for a while. It's extremely important that the upfront work is done and that the knowledge associated with doing the quality job upfront is done to help protect us and obviously make sure that that spend early on is well spent in a very positive investment instead of essentially being a problem in the long run, right? And a sunken cost that provides a problem on the books.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with what you mentioned, big data used to be the buzzword. Now it's AI, but with AI, you still need data and how the inputs are, right? And the quality of data. That's something that I was speaking to another leader about. And so I guess where do you see the future? And can you dive a little bit deeper of how the quality of data is going to work. And additionally, right, there's all different types of data within healthcare particularly. So how do you make sure that everything is labeled correctly that allows the AI to be trained?
Yeah, and I would say we involve people and we involve experts. So I don't see AI replacing licensed physicians, healthcare providers, and people that are very knowledgeable about the industry. What I see it doing is having their knowledge, and that knowledge being continually updated, by the way, not just a one-time piece, but that knowledge being applied and then essentially having a multiplier associated with it. And that multiplier can be used to get information faster, have better healthcare outcomes, less expensive healthcare outcomes. It can also be used to decrease the workload or the emotional stress or tech stress of healthcare providers that oftentimes are burning out and overloaded with a whole bunch of administrative type work that if AI and data can help in that process, then that's going to be a big, big help. But again, it has to be quality. So when looking at the large data lakes and, for lack of better words, word lakes, was involved, for example, back in 2016, associated with applying. Now it's would be called large language models and generative AI, but at the time we were applying algorithms to large amounts of words, essentially research papers, gathering all the research papers we could on a certain rare ailment, and then applying algorithms to it to be able to harvest and create a collective consciousness about that research docs could then more quickly understand what the current knowledge is about it around the world, and then be able to apply their creativity and their brain power to understand how we can progress our research on trying to either control or eliminate those ailments. And the key, obviously, is having good data in. If you have falsified data or illusions that take place sometimes, that's not going to help, and it's actually going to cause a bigger problem. So in certain industries, I understand in the legal industry, for example, there was an AI tool that was being used. And as it was being used, it came to a conclusion about the cases that it was studying, trying to help understand the details of the case and whether or not the case would be successful and how it should be run. And essentially in this process, what it did was started making up details to support the conclusion that it had. So it was kind of doing things in reverse a little bit. And when it was making up, it was literally falsifying data. That's an extreme, and we don't obviously want to have that anywhere near healthcare. But if we, again, can have that data be very clean, have the algorithms associated with both data analytics and AI well trained by experts, hopefully we can multiply that knowledge and quite frankly, the expertise that those individuals have can be leveraged much more, and potentially leveraged across the world as well, right? There's developing countries that maybe don't have the resources or the sheer numbers that are available. Robotics and surgery is a good example of if the surgeon that's located in Minnesota could do robotic surgery in Africa and help with the bandwidth and workload of the surgeons in Africa, that could help a number of people for a very long time. So applying that and understanding how that could work is fascinating. I think we definitely should keep going forward, but we just need to be extremely careful and have it well gated. We also, I think, need to make sure that we don't, I don't want to say overdo it because you can't really be too careful, but we don't want to necessarily stop progress because of known or assumed risks. Instead, I think what we need to do is work on those risks and be able to control those, understand them extremely well, and still move forward. I think at times, sometimes in healthcare, because of legal issues and sometimes past habits, people might be reluctant to accept innovation and change, and they might view it as a risk, and they're protecting their patients, which they should very well should do. But I think we should try to foster a culture of innovation, and risk taking isn't the right word for it necessarily, but progress, not being afraid to fail, but that failure shouldn't impact patients. So we need to, again, upfront make sure that everything is really well controlled. And there are certain circumstances and things in healthcare that don't affect patient outcomes at all, right? They're operational things that can affect supply chain transparency, for example. If we could have complete supply chain transparency across the whole healthcare industry, just the logistics of moving around, getting it in the right place at the right time, having a room available at the right time, an operating room available at the right time, triage coming in as the patient is first touched in the field by a healthcare provider, collecting that information. So as soon as they arrive at the next location, they have that information and they don't need to repeat those things and can just move forward. All those things I think are extremely positive. And again, we shouldn't be afraid to apply change. We just need to make sure that we control it and control those risks.
Perfect words. I call it being bold with innovation.
That's
And how
exactly
that's
right.
applied.
And quite frankly, not being afraid to fail at a certain level. So depending upon the organization, the culture of the organization, and sometimes you tend to see it in large organizations more than small startups. Startups are known for, hey, let's fail as fast as we can. We're going to fail and modify and fail and modify and fail and modify and improve. And I'm a big believer in market-driven innovation. So you essentially get outside of your lab, you talk to the market, you see problems, you see how they're evolving, and you continually innovate and update your product or your vision for it or your partnerships and who it affects as you're moving forward by getting feedback from individuals other than the pure inventors of that innovation. And so I think that's kind of a key little piece to it as well, right? But if we can do it collaboratively, it's fantastic. In some of those large organizations, failing is not an option, so to speak, as far as the politics and careers of individuals, trajectories, how they're viewed, how they're respected. Reaching out to the outside also can be a political detriment because in some cultures it's not viewed as if you can't do the job, you have to hire a consultant to help, or why are you spending so much time talking to the customers? We have a great product to sell it, right? Where when you can, I've had a situation where we tweaked just a little bit. We actually were already collecting the information, but we weren't using it. And it was something that took 15 minutes to program that was added on top of a workflow application that was in place for safety reasons. And that 15 minutes essentially allowed us to capture parts utilization that was part of the process of the workflow. In doing so, we were able to share that information within 5 minutes of a part being used to the manufacturers of the parts all the way up the supply chain. And this provided a significant amount of value to those players because they were able to now approach their customers and essentially decrease the safety stocks in the industry, the extra inventory carried that really isn't a very strong financial asset because it's not really growing anything. It's there for serviceability. And they did it to this extent that, again, talking to the outside and understanding other people's views of it, the industry's views of it, they were able to affect the change in that industry by eliminating all stock, not just safety stock, because they were able to take the idea that we had, if we provide you with this information of parts utilization, you can now do this innovation that allows you to be able to plan better and have less inventory in your supply chain as you lead up to selling to customers, as well as reducing the safety stocks in the customer's inventory. And as I was presenting, and we ended up selling the company based on this to a $1 billion publicly traded parts manufacturer. But shortly after they decided to buy us, we were in the boardroom and the president of the company said, yeah, Tom, you were right on the value this can add. And he said, but we're going to take it one step further. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do consignment-based selling. And that to me was, from a career perspective, one of the most unique moments because I was able to understand, I had this great idea and it could change the industry, right? But by collaborating with somebody with a different viewpoint, a different level of authority at times, and that could be positive or negative based authority because different people view things in different ways. And both at the highest levels and lowest levels, that input can be very valuable. I was able to learn that collaborative innovation with the market is extremely powerful. And at times we can have innovation that we feel is going to be very, very impactful in one way, and then it can be expanded and sometimes and very high multiples expanded, and or there might be an alternative innovation associated with what we're doing that we just didn't see because we weren't in that same place. And another example of that would be some years ago, I was working with the largest software company in the world, and we had a UI UX innovation that was very, very strong innovation. It essentially allowed search results on internet searches to be more than just text. You could now put images, video, audio, all sorts of things that you now see when you do search results. But this very large software company saw what we did. They saw how we did it. And they said, yeah, that's very important. That's a big step forward in UI UX. However, in doing this, you use less bandwidth when you move the file to the search results. And because you've figured out a way to capture less bandwidth, but communicate what's in the file, we view it as a large infrastructure play to save on bandwidth costs for large companies around the world. So that was another example of how we had a unique innovation, but by doing it collaboratively, exposing it to others, you obviously have to be careful so people don't steal your technology. You need to make sure things are patented and well protected and NDAs are signed and things like that. But if you can do collaborative innovation with the individuals that are in these companies, sometimes the largest companies in the world, tasked with solving these problems, and they can figure out along with you how to take what you have and make it even better and more impactful, it helps everybody in the long run. And it's, quite frankly, intellectually, it's fascinating to go through as well.
Like what you said there. I think one thing that you had mentioned that kind of brought me back to this thought is, why do you think there's such initial resistance sometimes with, incumbent players or people that maybe might even have that deep knowledge in actually bringing about that innovation, right? Have the knowledge, but sometimes it can't always be carried out to the downstream process of innovating on a new product, a new technology or a tool. And so why do you think that resistance usually happens, especially if we want to pair that with AI as well?
Yeah, and I would say three main reasons. One is it can be attributed to culture, right? If you have your highest performing employees that are very intellectually curious and potentially lateral thinkers and they're innovative just by nature, right? And if you don't allow them to at least express that in a way that's positive, then you don't get to capture that. And that's a big piece of AI. Once it's trained, it seems really, really smart, but if it's not trained right, it's not as intelligent. And I don't mean to insult AI. I don't want to get in trouble with some AI machine later. But the net of it is the human condition and the human experience and the creativity of it is extremely important. And I think it really can help with innovation and technology. And if you looked at AI as a person, they can work together with different strengths. So in these large corporations, I think sometimes those innovators are almost viewed as rebellious. And that kind of sits into the next of the three things that come to mind, and that's the risk, right? People don't like change for the most part, especially if you're making a lot of money, if you're an executive in a certain company, if your company is the industry leader, you might not want to change. If you want to protect the shareholder valuation, you might not want to change. You might want to slow change down in the industry. And from a political standpoint or operational perspective with your career, you don't necessarily want a lot of change to take place. Some people, when they join a company, they're put in place and they are driving to actually eliminate their job by training everyone that's working with and for them to be able to do the job, have them grow and have them not needed and either move on to another company or move up. In other cases, people are trying to keep the status quo the same because they're making enough money, especially when they're making a lot of money, and they don't necessarily want too much change that would negatively affect their position or their career. And then that brings up the third thing is just pure risk, right? So in healthcare, especially, there's a number of regulations that are in place. There are laws in place. The economy can be very litigious as well. And if we do change too fast and get sued for it, then it creates a problem, especially for hospital systems. About 37% of them are not making a profit right now. So for them to take risks, especially risks that they could be sued for, is a problem, right? Even though they might want to step forward. And I was involved in putting together a collaborative platform for medical research, which was a little bit associated with that AI associated with medical research. But it was a platform that we could essentially have any patient in the world, as long as they had internet access, be able to input their medical records and their information and via telehealth be in contact with the 5 top doctors in the world on that rare ailment and be able to get care and have their case potentially cost less because of less mistakes made in it. And more importantly, have a better outcome for that patient. So when we showed our POC to a doctor at a very, very well-regarded hospital, it wasn't Mayo, it was a different one, but he remarked on how great this solution was. And then at the end, he said, but you know what? I really can't use it because it hasn't been approved by our legal yet. He pretty much said that this is going to take too long and it's just not worth it to try to get it approved. Even though this is a great solution, it's too much hassle and just not worth it, right? So there's a little bit too of that. I don't want to call it tech stress, but that in the healthcare industry, they're very high stakes. These are people's lives they're dealing with, right? And they can't make big mistakes. And they can't do it partly because of their oath and their values, but also because from a business standpoint, it could be very detrimental to the long-term health of financial health of their organization. So they really have to be careful. And I don't know if there's a magic way to be able to accelerate innovation in healthcare, or maybe even studying and understanding what the real risks are associated with certain innovations, and then tagging or labeling those that are very high in risk and making sure we're extremely cautious about those, but allowing the other ones to flow a little bit faster and better, especially if they don't directly affect a patient, or if they provide information to healthcare providers that the healthcare providers, without getting even more stressed than they are right now with regards to dealing with all they have to deal with, can easily understand if it's a good or bad course, not force them to take the course that's recommended, but allow them to have enhanced decision making or easier decision making, have an assistant essentially helping them, but they make the final decision. So again, those three things I think are some of the things that prevent it and slow it down. And some of it's cultural, some of it's obviously society and how it works, and some of it's just people are in it, right? We are people, and change. If you're making $500,000 a year as an executive or more at some of these companies, you don't necessarily want to be rocking the boat too much, because the more years you can make that much, the better it is for your family in the long run. And quite frankly, innovation and change sometimes doesn't work, right? We also want to be able to take it and say, this is a cool innovation, right? This is fantastic. Wow, it's world first. I've been involved in a couple of world firsts, and luckily they were very positive, but some people come up with ideas and you're kind of like, well, that's really cool innovation, but it really doesn't provide any benefit to anyone. It can clog up the system more. If you look at human-centered engineering and innovation in that area, and a good example is bicycles or scooters that are used by children as they're learning to ride bicycles. I grew up in a time where we had training wheels that were put on our bicycles. And then we used our training wheels to help us learn how to balance. And eventually they were taken off and we're kind of given a big push, and a parent usually was there to try to catch us. But sometimes you fell and you kept on going. Nowadays, when I go on my walk around the Lake Harriet here in Minneapolis in the mornings, there are children that have these scooters that, instead of adding training wheels to the back, what they did was they don't have training wheels on them at all. And they took the pedals off. They actually pulled back innovation that helps the bike go. But for an individual in that stage or at that phase, not having the pedals on means they can put their feet down and just kind of run and then glide and learn to balance the bicycle without the issue of the training wheels in the back supporting them up and giving that kind of false sense of support. So I think it's very interesting as we apply innovation, if we can figure out how to apply innovation, not necessarily to add and layer on top of other things, although sometimes it's extremely productive, but sometimes maybe to simplify and take away and get things back to a simpler spot where it can be easier for people to be more accurate and more efficient and save money as well. So I think it's quite interesting.
Yeah, well said. I love the point about simplification. I think sometimes that's something that's ignored, especially in healthcare. It's so many layers, so many people building on top of old infrastructure, right? And so I think the simplification is something that's definitely needed. That's a true point as well.
Right, and healthcare is complicated. I mean, there's the people are practicing medicine. They're learning and improving. It's fantastic what the healthcare industry is doing, but it is very expensive and very complex and complicated, right? And how it's set up and how it runs. And again, if we can make things more efficient and have faster decisions, better outcomes, lower costs, that's fantastic for everybody. I think it's also interesting to look at innovation. We're talking a lot about AI and data and some of those things. I've been involved, as I mentioned, across multiple industries, dealing with all sorts of technology innovation is kind of the focus of where my career has been, especially the last 25 years, working with all sorts of new technology in new and different ways, and sometimes even explaining what a new delivery system called SaaS. Back in 2005, I was helping bring that to market and we were literally having to figure out if we were going to capitalize the A's in SaaS because it wasn't in the market yet, but it was very well received when I would introduce the concept to a potential customer. And they could realize, wow, I don't need a capital budget to get that technology, and I can cancel it in a month so the risk drops. But you have this reoccurring revenue, which is wonderful for the technology company, the delivery company. That's fantastic. So that technology is great and the technology innovation, but I think we also can look at innovation, and AI might be able to help us in this area a little bit as far as at least increasing our knowledge and throwing in ideas that we might not have had. And these are ideas of other people that AI has harvested from other locations, ideas we might not have had to be able to change how we do things and how we do business. Early in my career with IBM, I joined IBM at a time when they were going through a significant amount of transformation as the mainframe was becoming less and PCs were picking up, and then we were unbundling our services from our hardware and our software, et cetera, et cetera. And I was forced to work with less resources. We're also decreasing the size of the workforce. And while my territory kept increasing, which was fantastic for me, my quota kept on going up as well. And one year my quota was misset at a very, very high rate. And I realized I could not make my quota doing things the way we've done them in the past because I just didn't have the same amount of resources. And that forced me to innovate, not technically as much. We did use one of the first network CRMs that I'm familiar with, running on an old AS400 mid-range computer that was made in Minnesota, engineered and made in Minnesota. But along with business intelligence, combining those into a CRM that was networked was very effective. And that was some technical innovation. But I also innovated in how we went to market and how we worked with customers. And now the label that's put on it is called customer success. But in the past, what we were trying to do was sell to all our customers and sell and get more revenue to make quota. And what I did was I told my team to not try to sell them anything, but to ask them, enjoy the conversation that they have with them, smile and enjoy it, but also ask them how we can help them, what their challenges are and how can we help them. And out of that, what we discovered was the customers would share with us the challenges that they were trying to solve that generally they were willing to spend money on. But probably more importantly, they realized we were honestly trying to help them, not just make our quota. And in the process, they trusted us. And as they trusted us more and realized the sincerity that we're trying to help them and not just make our quota, they would start calling us, and to the point where at year end, sometimes customers are calling us saying, I have this much budget to spend by December 31st, or I lose it for next year. What can I buy from you? What are you selling that I can buy? And it was a very interesting situation because I went from taking a big gamble, applying innovation to market, and I call it market selling, where I essentially cast a large amount of a blanket of awareness across the whole market. And then through the trust building, allowed the customers to turn themselves into prospects based on their needs and the timing of their needs. And it originally was not viewed as a very positive approach because as a publicly traded company, we had to make our numbers every quarter, right? And my boss's boss was kind of like, what are you doing? You're telling them not to sell? Don't you understand? This is what we do. And luckily for me and the customers and hopefully the teammates too that I was helping be successful, we were very successful. We had 110% year-to-year growth when IBM was growing about 2 to 4%. And then we followed it by 58% on top of the 110. And then we had another year of growth of 38% on top of the 58 and the 110. And this was across about 2,800 wholesale distribution customers in the upper Midwest. So it wasn't a small data set to deal with. And it was a territory or a set of customers that we were actually losing revenue on. And it was a negative growth rate before we started this different technique. And again, we applied technology to we could understand what's going on in the customer because we had notes in the system and we had it networked. And if somebody was out sick, we could see what was going on there. But the main impact, I think, was, and the technology brought efficiency, but the innovation on how we did something and potentially an improvement on how we did it that the market liked and wanted was a key piece of it. And it was well accepted. So my whole career, listening to the market and understanding what customers need, what potential partners in the market need, how we can help each other, not necessarily bargaining with them, but negotiating, trying to figure out what are their needs and how we can help meet those needs is kind of a key to it all. And quite frankly, it's a fun way to do it as well, because it creates relationships that are lasting relationships. If you're essentially trying to help everybody and do true consultative type selling and marketing, then sometimes they want to meet with you and have meetings with you, and you're not viewed as kind of this, well, I need to have this meeting to be able to get this product or service eventually. And if we can learn from them, we can spread that around to other customers as well, depending upon if they're competitors. I also learned in that process too that there are other players in the market that can be helped with your innovations or technologies that you might not have considered or approached. So I was running a division of an energy management systems company, putting together a system to using sensors in the internet and things like that to understand what's going on in a remote building and then change the energy use of that building so we can save money essentially and save energy and decrease carbon, etc. In that process, there was a consultant out of Chicago that found out what we were doing and that we had a POC going into play. So he said, I think my client might want to talk to you about this, because his client had an intelligent camera. And by them testing their intelligent camera, they could get market validation on if it was effective, if it worked well, and if it worked well with our POC out in the field, et cetera, et cetera. We were able to see the difference in adding the camera to the system and see the incremental revenue, or incremental savings associated with that from an energy and business standpoint. And they were also willing to pay us to test their intelligent camera with our system. And it was very interesting because from an economic standpoint, as I was running the division, we were able to get the division profitable by helping another partner with innovation that applied directly to what we were doing, but it wasn't what we were going to scale on long term. But we were able to get the division profitable before our first product was finished, because they paid us a significant amount of money to do that consulting around that for them and provide that access. So it really was a win-win for us. It was a win for them to be able to get that testing in a real world environment. And then the customer saved an extra 10%. So it helped them as well. It kind of gets to that, again, to that collaborative innovation piece, and also having that open mind. And it can be great to innovate in a lab, and sometimes you need to based on what products you're building and how you're innovating things. But if you can be as open-minded as possible and flexible, have good critical thinking skills, and be able to apply them and listen, and not everybody's going to have a great idea, but if you can kind of harvest that out of the industry and the changing industry and potentially another industry, it can bring very positive things. And that's a type of innovation that isn't necessarily tech innovation, but it's, okay, how do we go to market? How do we do things differently? And how does that innovation help? And then lastly, you can pile that on top of or couple it with technology innovation, which I referenced a little bit about the old days, CRMs, network CRM and business intelligence, which now we have much more sophisticated tools to do that with. But it's very interesting to be able to couple those together. And then obviously, if you create a culture of that, then you can be constantly improving as a business, right? So, and to maintain your number 1 or 2 status in the industry, you need to control the risks you take and don't go down the wrong path, right? And kill your success. But if you can continually be innovating and evolving as the market changes and as you discover more about your customers' needs and potentially their customers' needs, it can be a good thing for everyone.
I love that. Another thing that I think maybe we can dive into as well is, how do you see co-collaboration, cross-collaboration also evolving in healthcare? Is there any nodes that you have there from your pulse on the market?
Yes, from that perspective. So doctors are some of the smartest people in the world, and they are that way academically, most educated in the world as well. I went to business school at the Carlson School here in Minnesota, Minneapolis, and sitting next to me in the executive MBA program was a surgeon that was in charge of all the surgery students at the University of Minnesota. And he was a brain surgeon. And between classes, he would look at slides at images of individuals' brains that he would be working on the next day. Very interesting, very intelligent person, extremely intelligent. And I think the healthcare industry is filled with very, very intelligent people. And those intelligent people are also in a high-risk industry, because if they make a mistake, it's a bad thing for the person that they made the mistake on, right? So they have to be very careful and guarded. And I think also in the academic environment that they grew up in doesn't necessarily, or it didn't until more recently, foster critical thinking skills, especially for the most intelligent of us, right? So part of their job is to be very smart and very confident and know what to do and quickly make decisions that maybe other people aren't trained to make, or maybe couldn't even be educated to make, right? And in doing so, sometimes I think that the healthcare industry maybe is not as open to new ideas or people from different spaces and industries. One of the world firsts that I worked on was something that we did for farmers, right? That had tech stress, that didn't even use email because they were sick of all the technology and some of the negative impacts it had on their operational effectiveness, especially during certain times of the year, as it's critical for them to be able to be in the fields doing certain things at certain times. And it was so bad that there was a secondary market for tractors that did not have the technology on them, that unfortunately, if the computer crashed, they literally could not use their very, very expensive tractor to farm. And they lost days in the field. And depending upon weather patterns, it could be very detrimental to them financially. And then emotionally, it was just not good at all, right? And some of these companies were also collecting information and not paying the farmers for the information, but then using the information to help their profits. So the net of it is some of them were rejecting technology altogether. And by reducing the amount of tech stress, simplifying UI, things like that, to not burden someone, but use innovation to help them and help their workflow, but help them even emotionally, especially if we look at healthcare providers right now. There's a high degree of burnout, and it's a stressful situation for them to be in, and they have a lot of detail and a lot of administrative tasks and a lot of risk management associated with that, as well as to get the payments through properly and things like that. So if we can apply innovation in ways that decreases that risk, decreases that stress, and allows for more collaboration, I think that's positive in the long run.
Another thing that I wanted to touch upon as well is we talked about, being bold with innovation. What is your recommendation, and specifically to who, right, within the healthcare industry, do you recommend being bold with innovation can really be applied for to bring about solutions that people want to see, to bring about the change people want to see, and really get down to the results that can really help patients?
Yeah, I see the bold piece being kind of in two different directions. One, at the very, very top, sometimes there are very innovative executives that will come from other industries and be hired into healthcare. And they have ideas, and they're not used to the healthcare industry, and they're not used to how resistant to change it can be, and also the culture associated with it. And they will want to accomplish some of the things that I dream of accomplishing in healthcare, right? Getting healthcare innovation technology to the patient as fast as possible to help those patients out, right? Decrease their ailments, prevent deaths, increase comfort, but also save costs for society. And the organizations sometimes look at it and say, this person's going to break it. And we can't really do it that way. They don't understand fully all the regulations, everything we have to do, and the risks associated with it, right? So then you get into the below the very top level, and their careers have grown, and they've managed their careers by managing risk and making sure that they didn't get shot in the process, right? Failure was not viewed as possible, and therefore they might be much more resistant to it, and they might manage that way downward as well, right? If you're doing a POC at a very large healthcare company and you've hired 70 people to develop it, and it's moving along, and all of a sudden you see, oh, it's not working out quite right, we're going to end it, and we're going to lay everybody off because we don't want to accept any more risk. That could be detrimental to all those people, and it could teach everybody, well, we're not going to take that risk because now that's a failure. And how does that failure sit in my, compared to my peers? How will I be viewed in keeping my job or getting the next one? So if we can be bold in having people understand and potentially even grade the risks associated with innovation, so maybe even have a scale and say, yeah, all this innovation over here, this is not risky stuff. This is not going to, we're not going to get sued for this. Let's move this forward as fast as we can. And then the innovation that is really risky, how do we put in place the right guardrails for it and safety pieces and involve the healthcare providers that are the experts at the right times to make sure that we're controlling that risk, and how to do that quickly and get to market. So if we can be bold with the culture and that style that is in place for good reason, because they've been protecting people for years, but can we figure out a way to tweak that and not have it be as resistant and have things flow faster through it, right? And sometimes, quite frankly, I've talked to individuals in healthcare, and some healthcare cultures are okay, we're looking for this person specifically. If you know of anybody like this, give me a call. And those people can be, they're siloed into, we want somebody that's just been in this type of healthcare for this long doing just this, which is fine. However, if you look at cross industry innovation and being able to take something that took place, and the example I gave with the farmers, if we take the UI innovation that we had that was a world first in that industry, it has direct application to individuals with dementia, individuals that are fatigued with certain ailments, individuals that don't like technology to begin with, and then with the healthcare providers, people that are just have so much to do, they almost want to quit, right? Some of the physicians I know, one in particular, spends a personal day each week doing admin work because he has to keep up with his workload. And how do we deal with that in the long run? And quite frankly, in the long run, how does that affect the quality of care too, right? So I think it is interesting. We need to be bold and allow innovation to take place. But again, we need to make sure it's done responsibly. And that extra push to do that responsibly does take effort. And I would call it grit to make sure that we are doing it well and not moving along too fast. Sometimes the boldness that exists in upper management, if they're not well informed about the technology and how it needs to be trained very well. I've heard of situations where they'll be talking publicly about something and they're not well versed in it enough to understand how it's really implemented. And then that gets kind of pushed down and carried out. And I've talked to AI startups in Silicon Valley, for example, that they're like, yeah, the customer didn't realize that they had to train the AI tool that we developed. Like they literally had to train, they didn't know it. And I've also talked to others, and sometimes they're high level executives and they don't necessarily, they're talking about things very confidently. But when you ask them about, well, have you cleaned the data? And this was years ago back in the data analytics boom that's still going on, in my opinion. But they would say, "What? Yeah, we got the data. Have you cleaned it?" Well, yeah, isn't it? What do you mean clean? Like they didn't know you had to clean the data or at least understand what the data set was to make sure that it wasn't bad data and was going to do more harm than good. So it's been very interesting for me at times because I've had chances to meet with very high level executives and quite frankly, the highest level ones of some of the ones I'm most impressed with, as well as ones that kind of move down through the organization. And then I've also, behind the scenes and as you develop relationships with people, they're honest with you and they say, to be honest with you, Tom, during COVID, I went into the office once a week just to maintain my physical office because I was afraid somebody was going to take it from me physically. And if they did, I would have less power in the organization. So therefore, even though I didn't have to, I went into the office one day a week to make sure my office was still my office. Literally, I was like, wow, that's a very interesting culture, right? And it makes sense because that's how that culture is, right? Um, and if we can be bolder and allow for some of that risk taking to be maybe encouraged, but also understand, especially in healthcare, what this innovation, what are the risks associated with it? And then from there, understand, okay, we need to treat this innovation very, very differently than something that's affecting parts and supply chain, right? Or tools that are needed, gowns that are needed, this or that, or rooms are very important too. Obviously, the resources of a hospital, the faster we can triage people and get them care, especially in certain situations, the better. And obviously, from an efficiency standpoint, cost savings. But yeah, if we can be bold with that kind of middle part, and then also make sure the very highest level executives are well informed, so they don't tell somebody to do something that technically shouldn't be done yet, but their boss told them to do that, and therefore they have to go forward and do that. But the boss wasn't informed enough about the negative impacts of doing that technology that way. That sometimes happens too.
Gotcha. Another thing that, kind of what you said touched on me is, the years of experience that you've had in different industries. I guess, what is the advice that you would have for leaders to really bring about the right type of culture of innovation in healthcare? What are things that you've seen that you think can bring about this?
Yeah, I would say to not be afraid to say you don't know something. I've been privileged to be able to meet and with individuals from the Mayo Clinic and Medtronic and UHG, Optum, some of the best in the world, literally, right? And some of the biggest in the world. Some of them that I meet with, those that understand what they know extremely well and then know what they don't know, and then know when they need to either get help increase education levels, hire new people, get consultants in, even get a third eye looking at it from a different perspective to see if there's a way to improve it, and are open to that, are extremely powerful people because they add so much, and quite frankly, they control risk in the process. That I think that's the biggest thing I would say, and it sounds a little biased because they can call me in to help out with some things like that. I'm more than happy to do that. I'm very purpose-driven to do that too, and sometimes that's how I make my living. Being able to, again, have the critical mind, but also be open, and then in doing so, if the president of Mayo Clinic or the CEO of Mayo Clinic or the Mayo Clinic platform, even though the president called him in to talk about AI and healthcare in the world and what should be happening, and not necessarily the current president, but other presidents, and he's very knowledgeable on that. As a new thing comes up, that different AI evolves, et cetera, him being honest with himself and the people around him, saying, "I don't know enough about that yet to answer that question, and I'm looking forward to knowing more about it and seeing how that evolves and how we can leverage it or protect ourselves from it." I think that would be very, very powerful. And some personalities are that way. And I think it also, when those personalities are that way in leadership roles, it's a phenomenal retention quality as well, right? I've had an opportunity to meet with Jeff Martha, who I have a high degree of respect for, the CEO of Medtronic. And some of the things that they do around the world, they do for good, and it's not to fake it. They're doing good. And a strategy behind that is, if we're not going to make a bunch of money in this market, supplying healthcare in this market, but we can very easily take what we have and help people with it, and help people that maybe weren't going to be helped at all, that's a really good thing. And that's a fantastic thing for us to do from a corporate culture perspective as a for-profit company, to be able to do that for different spots in the world. And in addition to that, too, he's admitted, but you know what, Tom, it's also a great business decision, because our employees see that we're doing good in the world. And because of that, they maybe appreciate Medtronic more than they would if they went to another company. And if we can retain our best employees by doing good around the world, that's a good business decision, right? So I see those pieces kind of playing a role as well. But again, having the quality at that high level of, who is this person, and are they trying to protect themselves, or are they trying to help everyone? And if you don't know something, you should really make sure that you don't have to tell everybody you don't know it, but don't talk about things you don't know well enough. And also have the confidence to understand that you need to learn more about things. I think that also will potentially help in the long run shareholders understand, this executive that is put in place here is very good. He's an expert. He knows, or she knows, about these things. And he or she or they also know where they don't have that full expertise and are not taking a bunch of risks in that direction, but can actually work on the problem productively because they aren't. And generally, it's interesting, especially being in the tech world, you kind of see those cracks once in a while in those personalities that, talk on stage about these things. And you're kind of like, well, I think they just misstated, or they don't fully understand that technology. And at their level, they probably can't fully understand it, right? But if they can understand what they don't know, is kind of the key piece, if that makes sense. When I joined IBM years and years ago, IBM sold a lot of different things, right? And there was knowledge floating around, and there were experts, and I realized that I wouldn't be able to I could only be an expert probably in one thing to be be the world's best. And therefore I decided not to be an expert in anything except for the customer and the market, and then understanding the overriding piece of that technology. And then, as I mentioned a little bit too, and leading to those executives, also understanding what I don't know. And then in that process, trying to provide that fit, and then bring the right people in at the right time that have greater knowledge to be able to create that fit. And then as that career evolved, I learned how important it was for the customer to be able to play in the innovation, the evolution of that innovation as well. So, it's extremely, again, intellectually and emotionally, it's a phenomenal thing when you've got this great product or set of products combined together, and then you're working collaboratively with a customer, and you get feedback And they say, if we could do this, tweak this way, wow, this now makes it worth 10 times to us what it was before. Oh, great,
Yeah.
let's do that. Yeah, let's do that. And everybody wins in the long run. And then in the healthcare space too, I think it's also important to have patients provide feedback, right? And patients have all sorts of different personalities, and doctors need to spend all sorts of time listening, and they don't necessarily have that time in their schedule. So it's a challenge for doctors and healthcare providers as well. But if we can, with the personalization and consumerization of healthcare, if we can get feedback from the patients, we potentially can understand better ways for the efficacy to increase and the cost to drop. Because if we can have that treatment be more effective, have that patient embrace it, do the things they need to do potentially every day to get healthier or maintain their health with the ailment that they might have, and whether that's taking the pharma that's been prescribed, going for a walk, drinking water, decreasing their oxidative stress, whatever it might be, taking care of themselves after a procedure was done. If we can engage them fully and have them doing all the things that the healthcare providers need them to do and doing it consistently, then we can have better outcomes for everybody in the long run too, and hopefully decrease stress on the healthcare providers.
Perfect. I know something that we had mentioned as well as the administrative level. And so what do you imagine the innovation in the administrative level being to assist physicians? What does that look like?
Yeah, well, there's an awful lot of things that are taking place now with regards to leveraging AI to help with paperwork, right? And there's all sorts of privacy things we need to also make sure, obviously, things are protected from a HIPAA perspective, as well as AI and how AI is evolving, and obviously the changes that are taking place politically in our country kind of is moving things more to the state level, but with 50 states potentially having their own definitions of risk management associated with AI in healthcare, it can become much more complex. But if we can take administrative burdens away from healthcare providers and leverage technology to do that, and in theory, if we, you know, do we have the technology to have a microphone on everybody in the hospital or placed all over the hospital doing voice recognition and understanding who they are that are talking, what they're saying, capture all that information, and then put that into charts and records? It's pretty interesting when we get to the point of being able to do that. We've got intelligent cameras also that can recognize people, right? So essentially, healthcare providers could have microphones and cameras on them all day long, recording everything that's said by them, the patients, their coworkers, and have that drop in the appropriate place. And can that decrease the burdens of the administrative work and the record keeping that needs to be done and things like that? Maybe it needs to be obviously reviewed and double checked, but those types of things are happening, right? There's also different types of EMRs out there. Can those players work together and outwork together? And where does that stand? That's a whole nother question in general, right? Like the dominant players in that space obviously want to keep their position. They also want to protect that patient information, and they legally have to help their clients do that. So how much collaboration can take place and how fast can that innovation take place as well? But I would look at it as, if we can talk to the healthcare providers, the nurses, the technicians, the doctors, physicians, surgeons, and say, okay, if you could just take care of patients, what would that look like? And then if we could assemble technology to take care of everything else, then that's fantastic. As far as the payers and providers and those types of links, I'm not deep enough into that space to know, but I would imagine that with just some of the work I've done in other industries as well, that there are benefits we can potentially study in other industries and say, wow, this over here worked really well. Even though it was viewed as a simpler industry, it was effective, and the way that it evolved was in this way. Can we apply it in healthcare at this phase of its evolution, and how would that work compared to how it's currently going on, right? So I think it's extremely interesting to look at, and understanding the psychology of the industry or the resources that are in it, how they're feeling. Again, getting back to the burnout piece, how can we use technology to really help enhance the lives and decrease the stress of our healthcare providers, and then and then move forward from there. There's obviously the coders and the people in the background administratively doing all that work. We can help them as well, right? And work on that side too, that overhead that's in the administrative side of the industry. And if you use, as long as we protect the information appropriately, patient information, et cetera, I view taking solutions that have been done in other industries and applying them very quickly in healthcare could be a way to go about doing that. So it kind of becomes a studying of, okay, who's doing this really, really well in healthcare? We can look at it that, but we can also say, okay, how is this problem solved somewhere else in the world, regardless of the industry there was, and how did they solve it? And that industry might be overly simplified and not anything like healthcare, but the fact that they solve that by having this type of visibility to that action or that movement of something, and they capture it soon enough or at the right time in the process, wow, that can change things. And then we can move things forward that way as well. And again, with the cost of society associated with healthcare costs in the United States, it's definitely, I think, time and energy well spent.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, our last question before we go on to the lightning round, and my question for you there is, how do you and what is your advice to, other leaders in the healthcare space to really stay up front on, the emerging trends and emerging industries that are going on to really bring that into their workflow? What data points should they be looking at and what information should they be looking at? And how should they also ingest that information to make those necessary changes?
Okay. I would say my advice would be to use AI, but to use AI and double check it. I use artificial intelligence a lot for research, but I've used it enough that I understand that it isn't the same quality as talking to a human professional that's an expert in that space. So if AI can direct us very quickly to those experts and that expertise, and then they can then either talk to or probably more practically read or have read to them what those experts are saying, and it can be in healthcare, obviously, but it also can be other industries for that problem domain that they're trying to focus on and work with. Then that can be, I think, a very, very effective way to do it. The AI tools that are out there, I think, are extremely productive, and as long as we understand that it is not the last word, so to speak. The last word comes from the individual that created it and discovered it and is the expert in it, or a group that are trying to understand what's not understood, but creating kind of an understanding of a problem that's not fully understood yet. How well is it understood? What are we missing? All those types of things in healthcare can be a big key, and knowing what you don't know is also a key piece of it. So I would recommend them not necessarily going to just one source at a time, but using AI to help direct them. And then I also would encourage them to not just look at certain journals, but to potentially expand beyond maybe the industry's recognized journals in certain things, depending upon what they're trying to look into, right? So certain rare diseases, for example, don't get as much of attention in mainstream as they might do in less mainstream publications or websites, blogs, et cetera, But by also understanding that, potentially having AI help you go through and find that, we might be able to expand our knowledge of things without it taking as much stress. I know a doctor who literally told me that he is so tech stressed or so sick of screens that he no longer reads or tries to improve his knowledge of medicine with a screen. He does it all with journals and paper. And to me, that is the opposite of what he should be doing. But emotionally, that's what he is doing. And that's the most effective way he can do it. And that's what he's chosen to do. So he kind of rejects technology and rejects getting information from other sources than the journals that he can carry in his bag, right? His backpack. So I don't recommend doing it that way. I also respect and understand what he's doing. He's very specialized as well. So that might be a big part of it. But again, if we can get multiple sources of knowledge on it, and even looking into other industries and saying, okay, what is the problem that we're really trying to solve here? Is it unique to healthcare? Healthcare is very, very special and very unique, but was part of it solved somewhere else at some point in time? And if so, well, that can work well, right? So it's quite interesting as innovation takes place. Sometimes there's also a history of innovation that affects it. So it's my understanding that when the space shuttle was built, parts of the space shuttle, the large rockets and gas tanks on it, are the size they are because of the axle width of the Roman chariots. So because years and years ago, the Romans had the wheels on the chariots and made roads, those roads were turned into railroad tracks. Those railroad tracks are the axle width of the Roman chariots. Because of that, them moving the parts of the space shuttle, they did by rail. And to do so, they had to move through tunnels. And because of that, they had to size the parts of the space shuttle to fit through tunnels on railroads. And it all evolved. All this was innovation, but it was dependent on past things that had occurred. So as we're looking at other industries and sharing and understanding what was solved somewhere else, I think we also need to make sure we understand, okay, what was the evolution of that innovation that took place in that industry, right? And what from that can we take, but also we don't want to necessarily have a healthcare innovation that was solely based on, the width of the Roman chariots, right? The axle width of the Roman chariots. So I think that's another thing to look at too, right? I'm not just saying let's blindly go to other industries, but if they solve something, supply chain transparency in another industry, for example, and we can apply it directly to healthcare and the same types of things, let's use other people's ideas, even though we're very, very intelligent ourselves, and give credit to those other people's ideas. And also let's reinforce within our organizations that seeing, sharing, and applying innovation across industries can be very quick. It can help reduce risks. It can be less expensive, and it shouldn't be viewed as less intelligent or the person being less important to the organization, but actually a quality that improves the organization's bottom line and potentially as well patient care.
Perfect. Now on to the lightning round. So my first question for you, Tom, is what do you believe is the biggest barrier to healthcare innovation today?
I would say collaboration, with outside collaboration and broad collaboration. And along with that collaboration, it's that critical thinking, having that open mind and feeling comfortable saying, I don't have to be the smartest person in the world. I can be one of the smartest. But if I can leverage others' ideas and collaborate with innovation, we can move things forward, and together we can create a better solution than we would have alone.
Tying into that is with what you've seen, the experiences that you had, what's maybe been the most impactful experience that you can relate with innovation?
Yeah, and that gets back to at the start of our conversation, the collaboration piece with that president of the billion-dollar company, that his view of the industry, his position in the industry, his authority, and how he was measured was very different than me. He also had a different mind, was a different person with a different set of experiences, and could add to the innovation idea I had that they were going to buy a company simply for that. But on top of that, he knew they could benefit from paying for our company, right? Even more by advancing that innovation and layering on top of it the different go-to-market strategy, a different pricing model, right? That the CFOs of those companies would love, because now they can free up those assets. It's essentially moving money on their balance sheets to a different column, right? Very, very interesting stuff. So, yeah, so I would say, again, the collaboration piece and working with others in the market, other partners and things like that. And then when that epiphany takes place, I've had epiphanies before that have been significant. And then when I have them jointly, or when others layer on top of that or around it, it's even more intellectually stimulating and emotionally pleasing to do.
And then lastly, with what you've seen again is within healthcare, what is maybe one thing that you'd love to apply as a change that you think could have really an impactful change within the industry?
I would love to see I've got 3 professional certifications from Columbia Business School in digital healthcare, so I'm a little biased in this direction, but I would love to see the ability to accelerate innovation to the patient and take some of especially if it's non-risk oriented, right? If we're not doing a procedure, if we're doing things that we know the outcomes are not going to hurt the patients, accelerate that directly to the patient as fast as possible. And the FDA approvals that need to take place, the studies that need to take place, I think they're important to take place. I think I'm very much in favor of gathering real world evidence of things that are being applied to patients and large sets of patients. But let's get this innovation that we see works in the lab to the patient populations, large patient populations, as fast as we can, if we know it's not going to hurt them, right? And obviously, certain types of pharma, this idea doesn't apply to, because we need to make sure we're extremely safe about what new chemicals we put in people's bodies, and those and the reactions and all of those types of things. But if we're doing something in the digital healthcare space, especially if we can have healthcare providers that are licensed and the experts in it be able to put a check on it and help us gate it, let's try to get it to the patients as fast as we can. And in doing so, again, gather real world evidence on the efficacy of it, the benefits of the patients from a physical standpoint, emotional and mental standpoint, as well as what are the cost savings. And if they have good cost savings, let's expand it, let's drive it, and let's save everybody money in the long run and get cures or controls to patients as fast as possible.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you again, Tom, for your time and your thoughts on collaboration and innovation. To wrap everything up, what are maybe some final thoughts and words that you have?
You're welcome. I just wanted to say thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you about these things. I think it's very important, and I open people reaching out to me to, if they disagree, especially, right? I need to be as open-minded as possible and understand that I might not be right about how I'm thinking about everything, but I'm very open to collaboration with individuals and would love to help people meet their goals, accomplish what they're doing, whether it be healthcare or other industries, and apply innovation and do it collaboratively and with purpose to be able to help people out and save money and create sustainability with that, economic sustainability as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Tom. Where can people find you if they choose to connect with you?
Yeah, they can feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, Tom Ellingson, based in Minneapolis, and feel free to reach out on LinkedIn, and I may have some contact information too in the contact space on LinkedIn if they want to use that information to reach out to me as well.
Okay, perfect. Tom, thank you for your time on the K in Clarity podcast.
Yeah, thank you very much. Have a wonderful day and enjoy.